Welcome to the All Things Real Estate Podcast with our very own Josh Barker. With more than 20 years of experience and over 5,000 properties sold, Josh brings a unique perspective to the real estate market. Let's get started.
Okay, let's start.
Let's do it.
Let the games begin. It's Joey Garton here with Josh Barker.
Hello, Joey. Thank you.
So there's been a lot going on this last week. Actually, it's been over the last few weeks. The
Yeah.
same topics keep bubbling up because they are like the big rocks. I always like that term you use. You go, hear the rocks,
Yep.
hear the pebbles, right?
Yep.
Well, the rocks that are big are still big and potentially getting bigger. Like interest rates are kind of moving very, very fast.
Right.
And that is a major contributor to our market,
Yep.
whether it's up or down.
Yep.
And interest rates, I mean, unless you've been on an island somewhere, you probably know that interest rates have been going up very steadily.
They have. I think right now we're at 5.5% on the average 30-year fixed mortgage, and that's up from about 2.9% in the fall of last year. So we're up over 2% right now. 2.5%.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's
It's
huge.
significant. Yep.
And like we said, I think we were talking about last time or the time before, we talked about that impacts the lower portion of the market much more than it does the higher, and that's your first-time buyers.
Yep.
That's your investors,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And so those are two major buyers in this market.
Well, actually, what just happened just recently was that the interest rate on non-owner occupied. So let's say I was an owner who wanted to buy a rental. The rates now for non-owner occupied are significantly higher than they are for an owner occupied. So Fannie and Freddie, who purchases these mortgages typically after they're funded, they basically came out and said, nope, we're not buying them. We want the rates higher. So, and it's an attempt, I think, to try to push more attention towards home ownership. And so, I think that's one of the reasons they made that decision. But what used to be a pretty low inexpensive rate for non-owner occupied, that's gone up a lot. So for anybody that's listening to this or watching this and they think that the rates on an investment property are the same as on the owner occupied, that is not the case right now.
They've always been like a little bit higher, right? Just like a tiny, your primary residence, you always get like a little bit better.
Yep.
But
no, this is significantly higher.
Significant.
Yeah. And without quoting it, I would just say it would be shocking to you and you'd probably want to check with a mortgage lender.
So that's going to slow down. I mean, I get that kind of concept of like, oh, we want to help first-time buyers more. It's like, okay, well then why not keep those interest rates a little, like, if you can do something with that program to where you keep first-time buyers.
They disincentivize somebody from using a mortgage to buy an investment property because the rates are higher for it, right?
Yeah.
So they're doing that. They're trying to reduce the competition for what could have been an owner-occupied purchase. I'm assuming that's what they're doing, because that's certainly what the net effect is on the market, is you have less investment activity taking place as a result of those interest rates going up, because it has an impact on the return on investment. So the higher the rate, the lower the return. The lower the return, the harder it is for an investor to want to make that purchase. So it's probably working if that's what their goal was.
Now, we talked about before that one of the big differences between this market and the market that we saw in the early 2000s that collapsed was that we didn't have a huge investment before. I think you were saying it was around 10%.
Yeah.
Which is very small.
Oh, yeah. No, on our last market update that we sent out to everybody, we actually talked about that in length, is that if you look at what the market was in 2003, 4, 5, 2003, 2004, 2005, and then, that the peak of the market was in 2006, and then it started to, show some problems, and then it started to decline pretty quick, right? Understand, back then, I mean, we had buyers that would walk into our office that were qualified on a 30-year fixed mortgage who were going to be buying in a subdivision for, let's say, $300,000, right? But if they went to a stated income loan or a variable interest rate or a negative amortization or interest only loan, now they can buy up to $500,000 for that home, right?
Yeah.
And so it's completely different property, same monthly payment, and that's what was happening in 2004 and 5. It's a big reason why we had the market crash like it did, is because we had a lot of people purchasing way outside of what they really should be purchasing. Because those all had balloon payments to them. Within a few years, you were going to have to pay the higher payment amount. Whereas today, we don't have purchases like that. Those loans are not available. They're illegal. The Dodd-Frank bill that was written years ago to clean that up eliminated those types of transactions from even being available to the general public. So we don't have that today. Back then, 2005 and 6, you had, the 620 and below credit score was a significant portion of the purchasing market.
Wow.
Yeah. Where today it's a very small portion of the market. So those things are different. And then back then, I think it was 50% of all purchases at the peak of the market back then in 2005 and 6. It was like 50% of it was speculation.
Wow.
Yeah. Whereas today, it's like I said, it's less than 10%. So we have a lot of good things about the market right now in terms of the stability of it. I'm not saying that we're not going to slow down. I'm not saying that we won't see something we might even give back some value if rates were to go crazy. But in terms of the stability of the loan itself, I mean, people buying homes today are strong credit, good down payments, sourced income, sourced employment. The stability of the market now is way better than it was 15 years ago.
Yeah. So that's, 40 to 50% speculation. I do remember people were pulling out equity to buy the second home, third home. I don't hear that very often at all. In fact, I don't hear that at all.
Yeah, I haven't heard it much either. Yeah, I haven't heard it a lot. I mean, if I have, I think I've heard them, paying down, student loans and, paying off other debts, and not necessarily like what they were doing back in 04, 05, 06 is that they were taking that money out and then going buy the next rental with it.
Exactly.
And we don't see that happening at all, in any mentionable level today. Yeah.
So interest rates are going up. That's gonna slow the market down. Of course, we're coming out of one of the hottest markets of all time.
Yeah.
Last summer was some of the sales. But I still see. I was about to say that some of the sales I saw were very, very high.
Yep.
But I was looking at some of the listings.
Yeah.
And they're still even higher.
Yes.
So when you say, I feel like there's going to be a little bit of course correction.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard people, especially on social media, they'll get mad at the real estate agents when they see a home listed for a certain price. And it's like, hey, look, their job is to get their client the absolute most that they can.
Right.
Now, the home price is determined by the marketplace. It's not determined by the agent. That's why an agent that undervalues the house, oh, hey, we got 3 offers at 20, 30 grand over. It's like, well, clearly you didn't assess properly. Or, well, it's been listed for 90 days and we haven't got an offer. Again, you assessed improperly in the other direction. So it's not the agent, but I do see some listings that I'm like, man, how did that pitch meeting go? Well,
somebody got pitched, whether the buyer pitched the agent or the agent pitched the seller or the seller pitched the agent.
I'm thinking retail plus 30%, blue chip player like myself, deserves a little something extra, like 10,000 cash in a gym bag.
More. Well, to your point, I think that anybody that's listening to this and owns a home or watches it, I think they would agree that they know this too. Everybody feels like their home is worth more. And you want it to be. I mean, and then when you get to the reality of it, I think that I always kind of feel like, sellers are ultimately the ones that decide what the price is that they list it for.
Exactly.
But it's a collection or a collaboration of what a buyer and a seller are willing to do in a deal that actually establishes the market. So, and that's where the market is. So, there's no fault in test in the market. There's risk involved in overpricing because you could sit on the market for a longer period of time. And, the attractiveness of a brand new listing starts to diminish quickly if it sits on the market for too long. So it has an impact on value. So, sellers, when they come on the market, it's wise to probably try to nail the value as soon as you can. Because in the worst case scenario, you might get competing offers selling it for a higher price anyway. Whereas if you overprice and you miss that window of being the new listing, and now the value of that home might begin to diminish in the eyes of a buyer, you could potentially sell for less than what it's worth, or what you could have gotten if you would have priced it right out the gate. And so it's always listing property is challenging. Sellers have they're challenged in that, and agents are too.
It's funny, the psychology of days on market. I have, because I practiced real estate at one point, and when people would say like, yeah, I like that house and everything, but look at the days on market. What we're going to do, it's like, then they watched an episode of Pawn Stars and they're just like, so, hey, let's offer them 50 cents on the dollar. I'm like, what? What? So it's a huge psychological factor where, well, there must be something wrong that we're missing.
Yeah.
Why has it been on the market so long? It's like, maybe
and
waiting for you.
Yeah, you're right. It's interesting you say that, because I think that over the years I've noticed that there's the days on, price reductions, for example, like I've had sellers over the years ask, well, a price reduction isn't going to make us look desperate. And I'm like, no, it actually makes you look motivated. So buyers interpret price reductions as motivation. right? But they interpret days on market as something's wrong with the property. And so that's been our experience of what we've observed over the years of talking with buyers and sellers. And so that's a pretty big aha, I think. So, don't allow days on market to accumulate too much. I mean, and the exception to that, of course, would be is if you have an extremely unique property or you're in a very unique price point, well, then it could take days on market to find that person. So I'm not saying that it works for everybody, but for the lion's share of the inventory that gets moved through the market, it should happen in a reasonable amount of time. And if you're sitting too long, there's probably something wrong.
And there's 2 points in my mind that come out of that. Number one, the importance of a good market. I was going to say like market overview.
Yeah.
Say this is what we're seeing your home is worth. And it is, it's not an art form. Yeah. It's actually a science. It's just not everybody practices that science full. It's like a math problem that's got about 30 variables, but most people are like, can we just stop at 6 variables?
Yep.
Well, then you might sit on the market, or you might have like, wow, why that sold so fast? Like, yeah, you were a little under market.
Yep.
So it's important. Market analysis of a home is super important.
It is. So what we kind of do in that regard is, we'll look at the market from a national perspective first. So we'll look at the overall availability of financing. Lenders kind of refer to it as availability of credit. And then we look at the overall interest rates, because those two things have an impact on what's happening in your county, right? And so then in the county, you look at what's overall happening in each price range in terms of, supply relative to demand. And then we go one layer deeper, which is to look at what's selling in a particular subdivision or homes that are similar to the one that you're comparing to. And it's that holistic approach that really gives you a really good perspective on what the market's doing. And so, like, for example, right now between 5 and 600,000, the inventory in the last 60 days has jumped dramatically. I mean, it's up almost 65%.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, a year ago we had 50, 60 homes for sale on that price point by the end of March of last year. And this year at the end of March, we had like 115.
Oh, wow.
Which
buyers have options.
Yes. And it's because of those interest rates. So when those interest rates went up, it had an impact on purchasing power, okay, by up to, at this point, about 20-25%. So buyers that were qualified, 6 months ago at 2.75%, they're qualified at 25% less today. And so that's starting to show up in our inventories.
That's a huge number.
It is. I mean, we're still in a seller's market. Our inventories are that tight that it's not having an impact on value at this point. But because the inventory is growing, market days on market could get extended. We could expect to see, if it continues to happen like this, we could expect those prices to definitely plateau. I mean, that first shot across the bow of the Fed raising the interest rate 0.25%, and the corresponding effect of them tapering, reducing the amount of mortgages they're purchasing now, it's starting to show up in the mortgage market. And I told our agents the other day, I said, make sure that our buyer clients in the market understand that what's happening with interest rates was on purpose. The Federal Reserve is actually making an attempt to prevent the housing market from appreciating at the speed that your milk and your eggs and everything else are going up. And they're doing everything they can to target that so they can prevent homes from getting out of reach and having them not be affordable for anybody. You know what I mean? That's the impact of inflation. So, if I were a buyer in the market right now, I'd just be grateful the rates are higher, because it's that targeting that they're doing right now. It's preventing those home prices from going up higher.
It's about a year ago, I was listening to, I wish I could remember the gentleman's name. I know you'd know who he is. It's like Ali Abdul or something like that. He's a famous guy. Bear Stearns brought him in, and he gave an hour talk, and he talked about some of the driving factors in the real estate market. And he talked about how after 2007, 2008, because of what happened, there was almost all new construction slowed down to almost zero.
Oh, yeah.
And so there was this glut of people that were coming up that were going to be home buyers, but there was no replacement of inventory. And it was going to hit it was already starting to hit, but he said, it was really, he laid out several factors on why, because we're like, why is the housing market going crazy?
Yeah.
We're not seeing those loans where you just pull out the equity by the second, pull out the equity by the third. Something is driving it. And it was that there's a lot of people that are, we're living at home in their early 20s, and they're ready to buy, and there's nothing there. There's no inventory.
Yeah.
And it hit the same time a global pandemic. There's a lot of factors.
Oh, yeah. Well,
pandemic hit it.
Yeah. And you're touching on like the family formation, even though they may not be forming a family. It's like you're getting out of the basement, right? So And you're having more people wanting to participate in the housing market in one form or another, because you've got one of two options when you move out of mom and dad's house, right? You're going to go rent and rent with friends, or rent by yourself, or you're going to go buy a house and maybe rent a room to a friend or something. But you're going to do one or the other, right? So right now we're over 5 million housing units short in the country just to meet the existing demand. And right now the population in the country is still growing. So either way, there's going to be an impact. So right now, with interest rates going up, if our sales volumes drop, which I would say that's probably a safest estimate to say that, sales volumes as interest rates continue to go up, if they do, which I think all the experts are saying they will, it's going to have a corresponding effect on demand. And those buyers who don't buy that home, where are they going to go?
They're going to rent.
They're going to rent. And what is going to happen to the rents?
They're going to go up
because the demand is going to go up.
That's right.
And so as the rents go up, now the cost of home ownership, or the value proposition of home ownership, becomes more attractive, because it's like, hey, I'm paying $2,500 a month for rent on this place, or I could buy a home very similar at $2,300 a month. So why not do that? You know what I mean? So
yeah, absolutely.
When I hear all these things about this massive crash, and I'm not here to have a crystal ball, and maybe there's some crazy thing that I don't see, but I don't see a headwind that puts us in a housing crash. And the reason why? Because people need a place to live. Reason why? We have 5 million housing units short. Reason why? Family formation, people moving out of their parents' houses, people wanting to buy rentals, immigration, all of that stuff that's happening. Is having an additional demand on the existing housing supply.
Especially with, like we talked about, I think, California has, it lost people. We lost for the first time a congressional seat, but Redding is the exception inside that rule, where it's like, no, people are leaving Los Angeles.
Correct.
They're leaving
big cities,
big San Jose.
Yeah.
But not everybody is leaving the state. A lot of them are coming into this area.
Yep.
And we it's very hard to replace inventory in the Redding area. Very, very hard.
Well, and I read an article that wasn't too long ago. I think it was the Hoover Institute, if that's the one that's out of Stanford. So I don't quote me on that, but I think that's what I read it at. But the number one reason for moving out of the state, and some of these people would probably think it's politics, right? But what it was on that report was affordability.
I was going to say taxes or housing or something. The fact that you make $150,000 a year in San Jose, and you're sharing an apartment with 3 other people.
That's right. That's right.
You can't buy, and that's like, wait, that's good pay for an engineer in their mid-20s.
Yep.
And so if you have teleworking and stuff like that.
Well, and that ties back to my point of earlier with the sales team we talked about a few days ago, where I said, just, it's a great thing that the Federal Reserve is raising rates. They've got to do everything they can to essentially try to prevent the housing market from inflating with this inflation we're experiencing right now. They've got to, because you can't have housing, the value of homes go up and then drop right away. That's a negative impact on a lot of families, right? So you when you're going through this major issue where you have a supply chain disruption, you have probably labor participation, access to the supply chain lines, all these things that are going on, that you've got to be careful with, that are causing a lot of the inflation we have right now. You don't want that to transfer into the housing market at this point, because it's probably short-lived. 18 months from now, I would imagine supply chains are probably going to be, I'm not saying 100% back to what they were, but they're going to be much better than they are today. You know what I mean? So if prices start dropping everywhere else, but now, your poor house was overvalued and now it's dropped a lot, that wouldn't be good either. So I think the feds are doing a good job. I'd like to see, how that impacts the market going forward, because all the experts are saying the rates are going to go up a little bit more.
Yeah. I was thinking about all the headwinds and tailwinds, because you named a lot of tailwinds.
Yeah.
All the headwinds and tailwinds in Redding, interest rate seems like the only real headwind, because our housing inventory is still tiny.
It's still tiny.
How far are we off?
Well, right now we're at about 1.8 months supply of housing. That's called our absorption rate.
That's it?
Yes. And so for our listeners, what that means is that if no other homes came up for sale, it would take 1.8 months to sell off 100% of the existing housing inventory. Now, by definition, that is a seller's market.
Yeah.
So anything up to 3 months is a seller's market. 4 to 5 months is kind of a neutral market. And then 6 months and beyond is what's considered a buyer's market. And again, we're at 1.8 months supply. And not every price point's the same. That's the overall number. If you get into that price point at 500 to 600 and 600 to 700 and all those things, as the price gets up in those higher ranges, that absorption rate's growing. It's higher. It's a higher number than 1.8. And in some cases it's considered to be a buyer's market. The upper end market tends to be more of a buyer's market. Why? Because the demand's lower than the supply.
Yeah. And also they're not as influenced by interest rates, that you're going to allow your cash buyers or people that are putting such large amounts down that the interest rate doesn't affect their purchasing power like it does when you're, it
doesn't usually affect the home they're going to buy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Whether they want to buy or not, it might, but what they buy, not as much.
So housing inventory is still very low.
Yep.
Interest rates have gone up.
Yep.
We've got inflation. So inflation, the interest rate is an attempt to control inflation in the housing, right?
Yeah, it is.
So the Fed's doing this. It just sounds so counterintuitive from hearing a real estate broker say like higher interest rates are a good thing.
Well,
like,
if you're not thinking only about yourself, right? If you're looking at the next generation, you're looking at the folks, I've changed now. When I was like 25, 30 years old, I'm like, no, I want the rates at 0, right?
Yeah.
Because you're trying to do everything you can to, leverage and all those things. But I think as you get older, you begin to realize, there's a whole lot of other people that are impacted by all the things that happen. So I want my kids to own homes.
Yeah.
I don't want them to get priced out of the market. I don't want to see them have to leave the Redding area because they can't afford to live here. That's what's happened to folks in the Bay Area. I mean, let's say you grew up in Sunnyvale, California, right?
Wow.
And like
you saw some change.
You saw some change, right? Yeah. And a lot of your kids might have graduated from college in the Midwest somewhere. They came back to their town in Sunnyvale, and all of a sudden they can't even afford a home anymore.
No.
And so now they're saying, "Sorry, mom and dad, but I'm leaving the state." And you don't want to put your kids in a situation where they can't afford to live where they've grown up if that's what they want to do. So for those reasons, I'd like to see housing. That's a selfish reason, but that's what I want to see. But I think when you look at the housing overall right now, I think you could argue that right now prices are probably, still fairly priced for what you're getting. Think about the work and the effort goes into getting, to acquiring a home and building a home and all those things. I don't think we're way out of whack on value right now.
Well, it's funny because the number it's the other day, I was listening to a couple of guys talk and they were, because it's tax time, right?
Yeah.
So people are like, oh, my accountant told me I need to buy, and it was two guys talking, and one of them went and bought a $103,000 truck. And the other said, I bought a $119,000 truck.
Trucks for that price.
Yeah, one was the $103,000 was a brand new GMC Denali, full 1 ton, cup
you spend
holders.
$120,000 on a vehicle like that, it better do my taxes.
Yeah, that was part. Yeah, that was the motivation.
Yeah,
and they had cup holders and everything. They're really, really stacked. Windows rolled down. It was really nice. But it was. They were sitting there saying that. And I'm just like, wow. If you're willing to pay $100,000+ for a truck, not an 18-wheeler, but just a truck that's going to be hard to park when you go to Costco, like suddenly a house for $380,000, like that's 3 of those trucks.
No,
I mean,
well, there you go. I mean, you're talking about inflation in a major way, and the dirty little secret that probably people wouldn't believe when I say this, but the federal government wants inflation. The Federal Reserve wants inflation. I mean, if you were to go right now online and look at the Federal Reserve, they will tell you in black and white, in writing, that their target inflation number is, I think, 2% or 2.5%. That's their target. That means that if it was at 0, they would want more inflation. And so it's just a variable that they're working with all the time. And clearly we've outshot it now for the reasons we talked about it in this earlier in the podcast. But, inflation right now, it's here to stay. And honestly, they want it.
I was just picturing Charlie Sheen as the chairman of the Fed going, winning.
Well, they're winning right now.
Yeah.
But it's scary for a lot of people, especially if, for those who are watching this or are listening to it and they're on a fixed income. When you're seeing all of these things around you that your services and your different supplies and your food and all the things that you need just to sustain, in your energy costs, and they're all going up. I mean, and you're on a fixed income. Those are the people that I feel the most sorry for. I mean, if you're participating right now in the labor market, it's not affecting you quite as much because your wages potentially are going up, and they certainly could over time because you're participating in the labor market where people are on fixed incomes. That's the sad part of this story right now, and that's a big reason why we need to get that inflation cooled down a little bit. Interest rates are going to be an attempt to do that. The Federal Reserve's coming out again and said that they're very aggressively going to raise it again. We have to wait till they do it, but that's what they're saying they're going to do. And all of us in every asset class is going to be impacted by interest rates. And Warren Buffett, I think, says it best that interest rates serve as gravity to value. And so when he gives the illustration, when he says is that as the interest rate goes up, the gravity on value gets stronger and it pulls value down. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So when interest rates are extremely low, the gravity is low, and therefore everything inflates in value. So that's why the stock market's been on fire for so long. That's why the housing market's been on fire for so long. It's because the rates were effectively at zero.
Yeah.
But now that the rates are starting to move up, it serves as gravity, and it slows down that appreciation piece. And in some cases, it even pulls it down if it gets really high. So the Fed knows this. They know the power they have in their hands, and they're going to be working towards it.
So what do you foresee we are this is the time of year that listings come to market, spring. This is when people from Sunnyvale, Los Angeles, Fresno, Bakersfield come up and check out the area. What do you see over the market for obviously look deep into your crystal ball, Josh.
Deep in the crystal ball.
What do you see over the next 90 to 120 days?
This market's going to feel hot and strong and powerful, I think, until either the Federal Reserve raises interest rates significantly, or we get or we get to the end of summer. I think one of those two things, because we're in that cycle side right now where we have our normal higher demand, where we have more people moving in from out of the area at this time of year, and we really see that strong market every year all the way through summer, and I don't see this year being any different. The appreciation piece will be a challenge because as interest rates go up, it's going to have an impact, like I said, like gravity. It's going to have an impact on appreciation in the market. So I'm not saying prices are going to be anything close to what they were last year in terms of how fast they appreciate. But I think that we could expect to see some decent demand. And then I think by end of summer, the real question will be, what will that impact been on interest rates in the market? So the long-term story, I think, is still strong because people still need a place to live. We're not oversupplied like we were in 2005 and 6 when it comes to homes available for purchase. We're undersupplied as a nation. So I think there's better days ahead for the real estate market itself, but we're going to have a short-term reconciliation. And, we got to get through that piece,
That's what I was wondering, if you saw anything in the market that you said the properties, the pricing is, you're very attuned to the market. I look at a couple of listings and go, that seems a bit I'm happy for you. Like my neighbors have a house listed and I'm like, man, I hope you get every penny, but I feel like this is Fonzie jumping the shark.
Yeah.
No.
And what you have to do is you have to have a short memory, I think, when it comes to value on homes. If I was to take my experience from 20 years ago selling real estate and took that experience in today in terms of value, I'd be underpricing everything, right?
Yeah.
So what you have to do is get back to what I talked about earlier in the podcast, which is look at the national statistics, look at the county statistics, and then zoom into that neighborhood and look at what's going on around your neighborhood right now. That's where you're going to arrive at the most accurate valuations. Don't be thinking about 5 years ago. Don't be thinking about 10 years ago, because buyers can't buy from 5 years ago or 10 years ago. They're dealing with what the market is today. So,
well, Josh, thank you for your time. I hope people got value out of this, and it's still a seller's market. And if you need a real estate broker,
I'm here to help.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks a lot.